I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. Okay, everyone, here in the gospel, the law gets really tough. You thought it was bad that in the Old Testament there were 613 commandments, but clearly the gospel, as we heard it here today, is that this is the commandments on steroids. The problem is, perhaps, that you and I, if we're really heard this gospel and are willing to receive it, perhaps the problem is that you and I really haven't taken these commandments seriously enough in the past. If you did, well, you would feel like the cost of admission to heaven is simply too high. But the question then for you sounds like, from what we just heard, are you in and out? Are you going to keep the commandments or not? After all, the way is narrow that leads to life, and few there are who find it. So if we step back and pause for a moment, you might think, well, this is not how the faith was really portrayed for me in Sunday school growing up. And really, it's hard to maintain that kind of understanding of the faith because it does sound a bit too severe, does it not? But the question, though, are you going to dispute with this passage, or are you going to take it at face value for once? Or perhaps there is another way to look at this passage without watering it down. If so, then the question today, if we want to be honest, if we really want to receive what we heard today, how? It's really an age-old question, because there are always people who look at people, at others, who take a passage like this at face value, and they say they're legalists. No one can live this way. But then there are others who look at those who say, no one can follow these commands. And so they disregard them, and they are looked at as antinomians, or maybe worse, liberals, or simply softies. So in order to understand this, perhaps it can be helpful to define our terms, because Jesus said, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes or the Pharisees, you cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. So let's just step back and ask for a moment what he means when he says the kingdom of heaven. Does this mean that if you don't keep these commands, that way the doors are shut, you won't be saved? You forget it, you don't belong to God. It sounds almost like Jesus is saying, all right, heads are going to roll. All right? And that would mean most of our heads. Or is he saying that the kingdom of heaven means a reordering of life? I am bringing the kingdom of heaven, he says. And how does he often refer to this throughout the Gospels? When he's bringing healing, he is bringing the kingdom of heaven. So perhaps we can look at this in a slightly different way. That I am showing you a way of an ordered life, a way that is healing for you and for the entire world. Clearly, when he's calling us to righteousness, he's calling us to something concrete, something that is real. And it is an inward way of living. So when he tells us to live with a righteousness greater than that of the scribes or the Pharisees, he really means that. But he's asking us to embrace God's goodness in a way that is so that what is inside us comes outside us. I'm going to read some words of a commentator that I think are helpful, who encapsulates this for us today. What Jesus is teaching us is a radical interiorization, all right? Taking his goodness, the kingdom of heaven, inside us in such a way that it comes outside us. Those are my words, but he continues. A total obedience to God, a complete self-giving to neighbor that carries an ethical thrust of the law to its God-willed conclusion. So then it continues here. Thus, the standard of righteousness demanded of the disciples does go beyond that of the scribes and the Pharisees. It requires more than an external conformity to the law's regulations. Jesus calls his followers to wholehearted trust and obedience toward the Heavenly Fathers that radiates God's love to the world. So, in order to understand this, we're called to put this in the context of God's love, his reordering in such a way that radiates to the world. So, it's kind of like this, to take on an esprit de corps, all right, a certain way of living, to follow Jesus in the way that says, yes, I'm part of your program, and I don't take that lightly. Because, yes, I want to see the world reordered. What he's talking about perhaps is less, not perhaps, I'm telling you this is how it is. It's less like an admission to a heaven after which the gates would be closed. It's more like embracing the mission. Think of a member of the armed forces. In particular, I want to use the Marines as an example. Admission is one thing, going through basic training. That's hard enough, but actually most people do get through basic training. If you meet the physical requirements and they let you in, most people simply get through if they're willing to. That can be, it's like an analogy for a baptism. All right, so you're in. The mission is the harder part. That's when you're called to lay down your life, after you're in. Then, if you are a Marine, and if you embrace the esprit de corps, you are willing to do anything. So, what is the quality that makes you a Marine? Is that how you live? Is it your willingness to follow? Is that what makes you a Marine? Or are you willing to follow because you're a Marine? The answer is more the second. Because you have embraced this quality, because you have this sense of belonging, then you are willing to follow and lay down your life. The order is important. The analogy, I think, works for any branch of service, but especially for the Marines, because the Marines are the only branch of service that gives you this identity for life, at least more than others. Even once you leave and you're no longer committed, you're still called a Marine. And so, don't you think that might have something to do with a legendary commitment to service that the Marines have when they are in active duty? Full disclosure, by the way, there's going to be a Marine recruiter at the back of the church after Mass. And I do receive an affiliate commission for anybody who signs up. So Paul points out, by the way, to the Romans, this was an analogy here that we have to circumcision. When he's writing to the Romans, he points out that Abraham belonged to God before he was circumcised. Circumcision was given to Abraham as a guarantee. But Paul tells the Romans that, no, it's by faith that he committed himself to God. He embraced God's program. And then the law was given to say, okay, great, now I'm going to show you how to walk in it. And that really came more from Moses. But circumcision, that initial marker, that identifier that you belong to the law, that you keep the law, that was given to Abraham after he belonged, after he was called a Marine, so to speak. And so that's how it is for our lives as well. You know, like we can extend the analogy a little bit further. Marines are given an insignia, they're given a ceremonial sword. But the mission comes after that. These are just identifiers. Then the mission is given after you are already in. So here, Jesus is speaking to those who are already his disciples. These are the ones who have signed up to follow him. Primarily, he's speaking to them. Well, he's also speaking, peripherally to those who haven't followed him. But he's saying, not do this and you're mine. He's saying, because you're mine, therefore, this is how we then live. So this is something that we understand even more in light of the cross, in light of that he is the perfect Israelite. He is the one who did truly keep all these things perfectly. But our badge, our self-worth, it's not circumcision. It's not some sort of a ceremonial sword. It's not even law-keeping. Our badge is simply Christ. You and I belong to him. Because of what he's done for us, therefore, we follow. What's more is that we are given something that St. Paul elsewhere calls the law of the Spirit. Doesn't it sound contradictory? You've got law, you've got Spirit. No, he refers to the law of the Spirit. He says the law of the Spirit of life has set you free from the law of sin and death. And so what St. Paul is saying in Romans 8 is that you fulfill the law without having to enumerate commands. The 613 famously from the Old Testament. No, you fulfill all of what the spirit of that law is and further. And so let's come back to this. Is this the commandment on steroids? Well, in some way, that's a good way to look at it when you have the Spirit. You have something, analogous to that. This is what you could also call the law of love. So, one more word about the Marines. Someone for whom I was preparing for marriage he would have admitted he wasn't the strongest Catholic yet. But when he looked at the selection of readings that he might be able to choose for his wedding, he saw one that he was attracted to immediately, which is that greater love hath no man than this, but that he lay down his life for his friends. He said, that was our way of life in the Marines. My buddies in the Marines who will be attending the wedding, they will get this. But you see, that's something that they embraced as the mission, not the admission. They took on that identity, so they learn to walk in it. And so now this is an identity that we have because we are willing to give all for the one who gave all for us. The first hearers of these words, the first disciples of Jesus, probably like you and I, maybe at the beginning of this Mass, would have found all these commands shocking, all put together in one place. Like, what are you calling us to, Lord? Okay. But that was almost like a teaser to say, follow me and see how this is going to play out. But when Jesus puts these words together in his gospel to the early hearers and then to us, this is to be received after the cross and the resurrection, after we understand what Jesus did for us, how he laid down his life for us, how he gave everything. And so this is amplified in our reading because we know the whole story. And so therefore, we embrace the mission. So we live lives not of earning entrance into the kingdom, but we live lives of gratitude, even supernatural gratitude, as we keep in step with the Spirit. In this way, we fulfill the mission, which is simply to lay down our lives for God and for neighbor. And in the end, there is no other law. So, all right, boys, you can go see the recruiter in the back of the church now. Or better yet, and this is for everyone, you can come up to the front of the church. Come to the altar. Come to receive the one anew who gave everything for you. And then when you're sent out after Mass, simply live according to the Spirit. Walk in the mission that you and I have received.